In 1884, three Louisiana trappers followed a blood trail deep into Bayou Noir, where Spanish moss hung like funeral shrouds and the water reflected nothing. They'd tracked wounded game before, but never heard it weep like a child. The locals had warned them about the moss-covered thing that walked on two legs and smelled of rot and copper. They should have listened. The trappers thought they were hunting. They didn't know they'd already been claimed. So, before we continue, please make sure to leave a like and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks. The year was 1884, and my hands were raw from checking trap lines when I first noticed the blood. Not the usual splatter from a caught animal, but a trail, deliberate, measured, leading deeper into the bayou like an invitation written in crimson. We were 2 weeks into the season, working the edges of Bayou Noir, where few men bothered to set steel. The cypress grew too thick there, their knees rising from black water like the bones of buried giants. The water ran too dark, so dark it swallowed light whole. Most trappers stayed near the settlements, where pelts came easy, and the swamp didn't watch you work. But easy meant poor, and poor meant another winter of empty bellies, another year of watching my sister's children grow thin. I worked with 2 others that season. Claude Thibodeau, built like a barrel with arms that could snap a gator's jaw, had a laugh that could shake Spanish moss from the trees. His cousin Marcel was different, thin as wire, with the ease that caught everything. A man who could read the swamp like scripture. We'd pooled our money for supplies and permits, betting on the deep swamp where competition stayed away. The locals in Uma called us fools. The old Creole woman who sold us provisions, Marie Lavendu, crossed herself when we mentioned Bayou Noir. "That place has been wrong since before my grandmother's time," she said, her fingers working a rosary made of black wood. The Spanish wouldn't map it. Their cartographers went in with instruments and chains. Only one came back, and he'd clawed his own eyes out. The slaves wouldn't run through it. They'd rather face the whip than whatever walks those waters. Even the Indians, the Huma, and Chitimacha, they knew. Their stories speak of the place where men forget themselves. Marcel had laughed, counting out coins on her counter. Each clink echoed in her small shop like a nail being driven into coffin wood. "Good, more pelts for us." She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength, her yellowed nails digging into his skin. "Some things are worth more than money, boy. That bayou keeps its own. What walks there ain't meant for Christian eyes. It remembers when this land was different, when the earth itself was younger and hungrier." "What kind of remembering?" I asked, though I meant it as mockery. Her milky eyes fixed on me. "The kind that grows, the kind that spreads, the kind that gets inside you and makes you forget. Which thoughts are yours?" She released Marcel's wrist, leaving crescent marks in his skin. "My grandmother knew a trapper once, Jean-Baptiste Arsenault. Went into Bayou Noir in 1823 with 12 men. Came out alone 3 months later, wearing clothes made of moss and speaking languages nobody knew. Said the others were still in there, still walking around. But they'd forgotten they were men. Thought they were trees. Thought they were water. Thought they were the moss itself." We dismissed her warnings as swamp superstition. Every stretch of Louisiana marsh had its stories. Rougarou, Fifolet, Cauchemar, names to scare children from wandering. We were grown men with rifles and steel traps. We feared debt collectors, not folklore. Our camp sat on a rare piece of solid ground, a small rise covered in sawgrass 20 yards from the main channel. We'd built a rough shelter from salvaged planks and canvas, just enough to keep the rain off our supplies. The first night, as we set up, I noticed something odd about the trees. They grew in patterns, not random like normal forest, but in rough circles, spirals that hurt to follow with your eyes. "You see how they grow?" Marcel asked, following my gaze. "Like they were planted," Claude said, spitting tobacco juice. "By who?" I asked. "This deep in the swamp?" Nobody answered. That should have been our first warning. The first week passed without major incident. We set lines, checked traps, skinned what we caught. Muskrat, nutria, the occasional mink. Nothing remarkable except the quantity. The old woman had been right about one thing. Few men worked these waters. But there were small wrongnesses. Animals in our traps that had been dead too long, days maybe, but without any decay. Perfectly preserved, like they'd been pickled in the air itself. Tracks around our camp that started as boot prints but gradually changed, step by step, into something else. On the 6th night, Marcel woke us with his screaming. We found him standing at the edge of camp, staring into the darkness, hands bleeding from where he'd clawed at his own face. "It was watching," he kept saying, "through the moss. Every strand was an eye." We got him back to his bedroll, but he didn't sleep again that night. None of us did. Claude noticed the real problem on the 8th morning. He'd gone to check the eastern line, while Marcel and I worked the north. He returned before noon, face tight with confusion, and something else. Fear, though he'd never admit it. "Something's wrong with the traps," he said. Marcel looked up from stretching a hide, his hands still bearing the scabs from his night terror. "Sprung?" "No, emptied, but not like usual." Claude set down his sack, which should have been heavy with the morning's catch. It hung slack as an empty promise. "Blood everywhere, but no bodies, no pieces, just blood and hair. And this," he added, pulling something from his pocket. It was a tuft of dark fur I didn't recognize. Coarse, almost like boar bristle, but longer. It smelled wrong. Musty and sweet, like moss, but underneath was something else. Copper and rot and something medicinal, like the emanations from a surgeon's table. We returned to his line together, moving through water that felt thicker than it should, almost viscous. 7 traps, all emptied the same way. Blood painted the steel and ground around each one in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Swirls and symbols that made my eyes water to follow. The tracks made no sense. They looked almost human. 5 toes, a clear heel mark, but wrong. Too long, too deep. The toes ended in points that dug into the mud, and between them was webbing, but not like any aquatic animal I knew. The webbing had veins in it. It pulsed in the morning light like it was still alive. Marcel crouched beside one print, measuring it against his forearm. "Whatever made this weighs more than any of us, maybe more than all of us together. And walks upright," I added, noting the gait pattern. The stride was enormous, nearly 6 feet between steps. Claude spat tobacco juice into the water. The brown stream dispersed wrong, spreading in geometric patterns before dissolving. Bear maybe, black bear on its hind legs. But we all knew bears didn't walk that far on 2 legs, and bears left claw marks. These prints showed something else, a dragging mark beside each step, as if something trailed behind the walker, something heavy and wet. When I looked closer, I could see plant matter pressed into the drag marks. Moss, but growing. Fresh green shoots sprouting from where this thing had passed just hours before. We reset the traps and returned to camp. That night, we kept our rifles loaded and took shifts watching. Nothing came, but I heard things. Breathing that sounded like wind through wet leaves. Footsteps that squelched but never got closer. And once, just once, what sounded like someone humming a song I almost recognized. A French lullaby my mother sang, but played backward. The notes reversed into something mournful and wrong. In the morning, the eastern line was empty again. This time, one trap was missing entirely. We found it 30 yards into the swamp, twisted into a shape that shouldn't have been possible. The steel was bent like soft wire, formed into something that looked almost like letters, like writing in a language that predated words. Marcel held it up with shaking hands. No animal did this. Maybe, Claude started, but stopped. We could see he didn't believe whatever he was about to say. I took the twisted metal from Marcel. It was warm. Not sun warm, but body warm, like something had been holding it. And it was damp with more than swamp water. The moisture had a consistency like saliva, stringy between my fingers. We spent the day relocating traps, keeping them within sight distance of our shelter. The work was hard, slogging through knee-deep mud and fighting through curtains of moss. The moss was everywhere here, hanging in sheets so thick they blocked out the sun. But it wasn't random. The deeper we went into the bayou, the more I noticed patterns in how it hung. Formations that repeated, shapes that suggested purpose. You ever seen moss grow like this? I asked Claude, pointing to a particularly strange formation, strands woven together in a tight spiral that pulsed in the stagnant air. He shook his head. Moss don't grow. It just hangs. This is growing, Marcel said quietly. He was right. We could see new strands emerging from old ones, growing as we watched, slow but visible, growing toward us. As we worked, I noticed something else about the moss. In certain spots, it grew differently. Thicker, almost like it had been woven together. These patches smelled stronger. That same mix of decay and metal, but also something sweet, like overripe fruit, like bait. You see that? I asked Claude, pointing to a particularly dense mass hanging between two cypresses. He followed my gaze and froze. The moss wasn't just thick. It was shaped, like a crude shelter or a nest. Something had gathered it deliberately, twisted it into a hollow big enough for a man to crouch inside. The edges were neat, trimmed, maintained. Inside the hollow, something gleamed white. Bones, but arranged, placed, a pattern that hurt to perceive. Marcel approached slowly, rifle raised. There's more over here. We found 6 of these moss structures in a rough circle around a massive cypress. The tree itself was ancient, older than the settlement, older than memory. Its trunk was wider than our shelter, its roots forming walls and caves where they emerged from the water. The bark was scarred with marks, not random damage, but deliberate carving. Symbols that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. Some looked almost like French letters, but wrong. Others were older, much older. They hurt to look at directly, made my teeth ache and my vision blur. At the base of the tree, we found something that made us all step back. A pile of clothes, decades of them, different styles from different eras. Spanish colonial, French colonial, American frontier, all rotting together, but all laid out neat, like someone had undressed carefully before. Before what? We should go, Marcel whispered. His voice cracked like a boy's. Claude shouldered his rifle, but I could see his hands shaking. We're not running from empty nests and old trees. What about from this? I asked, pointing to something I'd just noticed. In the mud around the tree, pressed deep and clear, were footprints. Dozens of them, all different sizes, from child small to giant. But they all led to the tree. None led away. That night, we heard it for the first time. It started as a low moan from somewhere in the swamp. Human enough to raise gooseflesh, but wrong in pitch and duration. No man's lungs could hold a note that long. The sound rose and fell like crying, like a child, lost and hurt. Then it shifted into something else. A chittering laugh that echoed off the water, seemed to come from the moss itself, from every strand simultaneously. We sat around our small fire, weapons ready. The sound circled us, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always moving, always watching. And then, worse than the sounds, came the silence. Complete, absolute. No insects, no water lapping, no wind. Like the world had stopped breathing. Could be a panther, Claude said without conviction. They scream like women sometimes. Marcel shook his head. You ever hear a panther laugh? You ever hear a panther speak? Because that's what happened next. A voice, wet and struggling, like someone talking through a throat full of mud. Vous êtes nouveau ici. Bienvenue. Bienvenue à la maison. You are new here. Welcome. Welcome home. The worst part was that it sounded happy. Genuinely. Terribly happy. Near dawn, the sound stopped. We found tracks around our camp, the same long prints. But now we could see where they'd paused, where whatever made them had stood still and watched us. The closest prints were 10 feet from where I'd been sitting on watch. I'd never seen or heard it approach. But there was something else. In the mud beside the prints, we found an offering. 3 fresh fish, filleted with surgical precision, arranged in a pattern that mirrored the symbols on the ancient cypress. It's feeding us, Marcel said, his voice hollow, like we're pets or livestock. Claude kicked the fish into the water. They floated wrong, sideways, against the current that shouldn't exist in a bayou. On the 10th day, we lost Marcel. He'd gone to check the southern line just after sunrise. Close enough we could hear him whistling as he worked, an old voyageur song his grandfather had taught him. The whistle stopped mid-note, not ending, just stopping, like someone had slapped a hand over his mouth. Claude and I crashed through the underbrush, calling his name. The moss seemed to grab at us, pull at our clothes, our hair. We found him by the 3rd trap, standing perfectly still, facing away from us. His hands were at his sides, fingers splayed, and something was wrong with his shadow. It fell in the wrong direction, toward the sun instead of away. Marcel! Claude called. He didn't turn, didn't move. As we got closer, I saw why. His eyes were wide, pupils dilated despite the morning sun. His mouth hung open slightly, and something green grew from it. Moss, but fresh, alive, rooted in his tongue. When he breathed, it fluttered. Claude grabbed his shoulder. Marcel, what's wrong with you? Marcel's head turned slowly toward us. Too slowly, like his neck was fighting the motion. When he spoke, his voice was flat, empty, and the moss moved with his words, dancing. It showed me. Showed you what? How we look inside. Under the skin. Under the meat. It knows how we're built. Every vein. Every nerve. It's been watching. Learning. Collecting. His eyes focused on me, and I saw they'd changed color. From brown to green. The green of deep swamp water. It wants to improve us, make us better, make us last. I slapped him hard across the face. The moss fell from his mouth, landing wet on my boots. He blinked, shuddered, then collapsed. We carried him back to camp where he lay fevered for hours, muttering in languages. French, yes, but also Spanish. And something else, something older, that sounded like no human language should sound. When he finally woke properly, he couldn't remember what happened. But he was different. Kept staring at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Kept touching his face, his arms, as if making sure they were still there. And his shadow still fell wrong. "We're leaving," I said. "Today." Claude nodded slowly. "Let me pull the traps. No sense losing everything." I should have said no. Should have insisted we leave immediately. But those traps were worth 2 months' wages, and we had nothing to show for our time in the bayou. Pride, poverty, stupidity. They'd be our doom. Claude took the pirogue, while Marcel and I packed our camp. The sun was high, the day hot and still. Sweat soaked through my shirt as I rolled canvas and coiled rope. Marcel moved slowly, mechanically, still not quite himself. I caught him once, standing perfectly still, staring at nothing, moss growing between his fingers. When I shouted his name, he looked at me confused, then brushed the moss away like it was nothing. Then we heard Claude scream. Not a shout of surprise or pain, a real scream, terror and disgust mixed into something primal. It came from the eastern line, maybe 200 yards through the cypress. I grabbed my rifle. Marcel didn't move, couldn't move. He stood frozen, that green tinge returning to his eyes. "Stay here," I told him. "If I'm not back in 10 minutes, take what you can carry and get to the settlement." He nodded without looking at me. A strand of moss fell from his hair. I ran through the swamp, mud sucking at my boots, moss slapping my face. The moss was wrong here. It moved without wind, reaching for me, trying to tangle in my clothes. Claude's screaming had stopped, but I could hear something else now. Splashing, thrashing, the sound of struggle, and underneath it, that chittering laugh. I burst through a wall of moss and saw them. Claude was on his back in the shallow water, arms up defensively. Above him crouched something that had once been human, or looked human, or was trying to be human. It was covered entirely in moss, not wearing it, but grown through with it. The green-gray strands emerged from its skin in patches, hung from its arms in sheets. Its body was wrong, elongated, like it had been stretched on a rack. I could see its ribs through the moss, but there were too many of them. Its spine had extra curves, visible humps that moved independently. Its face was the worst part. Still recognizably a face, but elongated, stretched like taffy. The eyes were human eyes, brown and desperate and ancient, but they sat too far apart. The mouth opened sideways, showing rows of teeth that belonged in no human mouth, some flat like ours, others sharp, others like molars, but wrong, all mixed together like it couldn't decide what it was supposed to be. It had Claude's wrist in one hand, a hand with too many joints, fingers that bent in ways that made my stomach turn. With its other hand, it was doing something to Claude's arm, studying it, bending it, testing how it moved, learning. I raised my rifle and fired. The bullet hit the thing's center mass. It jerked back, looked at me with those terrible human eyes, then smiled. Black liquid oozed from the wound, but it wasn't blood. It was thick, viscous, and where it hit the water, moss began to grow instantly. It stood slowly, releasing Claude. It was tall, 7 feet, maybe 8. Its legs had too many bends, knees that went both ways. Its spine curved wrong. But it walked upright like a man trying to remember how to be a man, or like something that had watched men walk and was still practicing. It spoke. God help me, it spoke. Vous êtes nouveau. You are new. The voice was wet, struggling through a throat not meant for French. Je me souviens de français. Je me souviens. I remember French. I remember being French. Captain Auguste Beauregard, Company of the Indies, year of our Lord. It paused, its face twisting with effort. The years run together. They flow like water, like moss grows. 17, 18, the numbers mean nothing now. I fired again. This time it stepped aside, too fast, movement blurring like a snake strike. It laughed, that chittering sound we'd heard in the darkness. Bullets, it said, switching to English now, heavily accented with something that might have once been Parisian French. I remember bullets. They used to hurt. They used to matter. Now they just go through, like rain through leaves. It tilted its head at an angle that would have snapped a normal neck. You want to know what I am? I wanted to know too. Wanted to chart this place, make maps, claim land for the company. It laughed again, wet and horrible. The land claimed me instead. The moss got inside, changed me, improved me, made me last. What do you want? I managed to ask. Want? It seemed to consider this, one hand reaching up to touch its own face, fingers exploring the wrong shapes like it had forgotten what it felt like. I wanted to go home once, to Paris, to my wife, Marie-Claire, but I forgot her face. Forgot faces were supposed to be this shape. It gestured at its elongated features. The moss remembers everything, but differently. It remembers the idea of a man, not the specifics. Claude scrambled backward through the water towards me. The thing watched him go, then looked back at me. The bayou needs caretakers, it said. Gardeners. The moss must be tended. Patterns must be maintained. The old promises must be kept. Promises to who? It smiled, that sideways mouth full of wrong teeth. To what came before? What sleeps beneath? What the Spanish found and fled from? What the Indians knew to avoid? It's down there, under the black water, under the mud, waiting. The moss is its dreams. We are its dreams, and dreams must be fed. It turned and walked into the deeper swamp, each step wrong, joints bending backwards and forwards, with no apparent pattern. It paused once, looking back over a shoulder that had rotated too far. The one you call Marcel. He's already starting. I can smell it. The moss knows him now. 3 days, maybe 4. Then he'll understand. Then he'll help tend the garden. Help feed the dreams. You're lying, I said. Check his tongue, it said. Check his throat. The moss is already there, growing down, growing in. Soon it will reach his lungs, then his heart, then his thoughts. Then he'll be like me. Better than me. I was first generation, crude, experimental. He'll be refined, perfected. Then it was gone, vanished into the green darkness like it had never been. Claude and I ran. We didn't stop for supplies, didn't stop for traps. We ran through the swamp to where we'd left Marcel. He was gone, but the tracks told us enough. His boot prints led away from camp, deeper into the bayou. Alongside them were other tracks, the long, wrong footprints we'd been finding all week. But these were fresh, and there were many, so many, dozens of things that had once been men, all walking together, all heading to that ancient cypress. We found one more thing before we fled, a piece of paper tucked into Marcel's abandoned pack. his handwriting, but shaky. It's growing in me. I feel it under my skin, like roots, like moss. It started when I looked at it, when it touched me. 3 days, it said. 3 days, and I'll understand. I can feel my thoughts changing, starting to see the patterns. The symbols make sense now. The tree is calling. Don't follow. Don't let it touch you. The bayou keeps its own. I'm already kept. Tell my mother I loved her. Tell her I died human. M. We made it to the settlement by nightfall, running until our legs gave out, then dragging ourselves the rest of the way. No one believed us. Swamp fever, they said. Bad water, bad air. Marcel would turn up. He never did. But others started disappearing. One here, one there. Always those who ventured too close to Bayou Noir. The authorities sent search parties twice. The first came back missing 3 men. The second didn't come back at all. Claude left Louisiana that winter, took work on the railroads heading west. Last I heard, he'd made it to California. He sent one letter. I still dream of moss. Still wake up checking my tongue. Get out while you can. But I stayed. Couldn't leave. Something pulled me back to the edge of Bayou Noir month after month. Never entering, just watching, listening, documenting. I've seen them, sometimes, at dawn or dusk, when the light falls wrong. Shapes moving through the moss. Some walk upright, some crawl. Some drag themselves on bellies full of growing things. All were men once, trappers, soldiers, explorers, slaves, Indians, all transformed by whatever lives in that ancient place. Sometimes, on still nights, when the moss hangs heavy, I hear them singing. Voices that might have once been human, French songs, Spanish hymns, native chants, all blended into something new. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear Marcel singing the voyageur songs he used to whistle while checking traps. But the voice is wrong now. Too wet, too deep, too happy. Marie Lavendu, the old Creole woman, found me last week at the edge of the bayou. I was standing there, staring into the green darkness, moss growing between my fingers. I don't remember walking there. Don't remember how long I'd been standing. It's calling you, she said. Every night. You've been touched. Marked. It's patient. The thing in the bayou. It can wait. It has waited. Since before the Indians. Before men. Before the land was land. It feeds on change. On transformation. On the space between what is and what becomes. How do I stop it? She laughed, but it was sad. You don't. You run. You run far and fast and never look back. Or you answer the call and become what you become. There is no middle ground with old things. They take you whole or not at all. But I can't run. Started finding moss under my fingernails that wasn't there the night before. Started understanding the symbols carved in that ancient cypress, even though I'd never studied them. Started dreaming in languages I don't know, seeing through eyes that aren't mine, remembering things that never happened to me. The thing in the bayou told the truth. It keeps us all, eventually. I can feel it calling, patient as the swamp itself. One day soon, I'll answer. One day, I'll walk back into that green darkness and let the moss fill me up until I forget what I was. Until I become another thing that walks on too many joints and remembers being human. But not today. Today I write this down. Today I remember my name, Thomas Laurent Fitzgerald. Today I remember skin. Remember bones that don't bend wrong. Remember the difference between man and what comes after. Today I resist. Tomorrow? Tomorrow the moss grows thicker. Tomorrow the call gets stronger. Tomorrow I might forget why I was afraid. Tomorrow I might remember why I shouldn't be. The bayou keeps its own, always has, always will. And somewhere in Bayou Noir, in the shadows between cypress roots, things that were trappers once stand perfectly still, covered in moss, tending their garden of transformations, waiting for the next fool to come looking for easy wealth in dark water, waiting to show them what we looked like inside, waiting to help them forget, waiting to keep them forever, waiting to make them perfect. The moss is already growing. I can feel it in my lungs now, soft and green and patient. It doesn't hurt. That's the worst part. It feels like coming home. Marie Lavanda was wrong about one thing. There is a middle ground. It's here, in these words, in this warning. As long as someone remembers, as long as someone writes it down, a part of us stays human, even after the moss takes everything else. Remember our names. Remember we were men. Remember we walked on two legs and our bones didn't bend wrong. Remember, before you forget everything else, the garden must grow, the dreams must feed, the moss must spread. But remember, please remember,